In a small town where everyone knows everyone, a place that was supposed to offer help and support, a racist mechanic's decision would lead to a chain of events that no one saw coming. It was just another day at the local garage. The sun was shining, the smell of motor oil and grease filled the air, and the sound of engines revving echoed through the street. But for one black biker, it turned into something much darker. What should have been a routine stop for a tire change quickly spiraled into a confrontation that would expose more than just a broken bike. This mechanic had a reputation in the town, not for his skill in fixing engines or his ability to get vehicles running in no time, but for something far more troubling: his deep-seated racist views. On this day, as fate would have it, he met a man who wasn't about to let discrimination slide. A black biker, cruising down the road with nothing but a few miles left on his journey, rolled into the garage, expecting nothing more than a simple service. But what happened next would shock everyone. When the biker approached the mechanic, a simple greeting turned into a cold, dismissive refusal. The mechanic looked him up and down, clearly making assumptions based on nothing but the color of his skin. He didn't even attempt to offer his usual customer service smile. Instead, he flat out refused to service the biker's motorcycle, offering no explanation other than a condescending wave and a muttered comment that left no room for discussion. The biker was stunned. Never in his life had he been treated so unfairly for something so trivial. His heart raced, and for a moment he thought about walking away, letting it go. But something inside him told him to stand up for himself. The biker didn't leave. He stood his ground and demanded an explanation. But the mechanic's words only grew more hurtful, more blatant, as he leaned on his counter and sneered. "I don't serve people like you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. The biker, taken aback, tried to keep his composure, but the weight of those words settled like a stone in his chest. It wasn't just about the bike anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and standing up to hatred that no one should have to endure. What happened next was a turning point, a moment that would send shockwaves through the town. Word quickly spread about the mechanic's outrageous behavior. The biker, hurt but not defeated, took his story to social media. Within hours, the post went viral. The mechanic, once known for his work in the garage, was now known for something far worse: his racism. People rallied behind the biker, flooding the comments with messages of support and outrage. But what was truly unsettling was how quickly the mechanic's world began to crumble. The town, which had long turned a blind eye to his discriminatory views, suddenly found itself divided. Some sided with the mechanic, stubbornly defending him, while others were appalled and vowed never to give him business again. The local community, who once had his back, now had to confront the reality of his actions. And while the mechanic tried to brush off the backlash, it was clear that the damage was done. The business he had spent years building was now hanging by a thread. The man who once seemed untouchable was beginning to feel the consequences of his actions. But what would happen to the mechanic next? Would he face the repercussions of his hateful words and actions, or would he be able to weather the storm? And how would the biker, who was just looking for a little respect, continue his journey after such a painful experience? The truth is, the story was just beginning, and the fallout was far from over. The tension hung in the air, thick and unresolved, as everyone waited to see how the final chapter would unfold. The mechanic's fate had been sealed, but the story of the biker and the town had only just begun. The tension that began to brew in the small town after the incident wasn't just felt in the mechanic's shop. It spread like wildfire, touching every corner of the community. For years, the mechanic had been a fixture, a reliable name in town. People trusted him to fix their cars, their bikes, their machines. He was known for his skill, But there was always something just beneath the surface, a sense that maybe not everything was as perfect as it seemed. The biker's experience brought it all to light. The mechanic, whose name was Ray, had lived in this town his whole life. He had inherited the shop from his father, and for decades, it had been a cornerstone of the community. He was respected, admired, and for the most part, people had turned a blind eye to his occasional offhand comment or the jokes that he made behind closed doors. No one questioned him. He was the one who fixed everything. He was part of the town's foundation. But now, all those years of hidden prejudice came to the forefront, and the town couldn't ignore it any longer. The biker, named Marcus, wasn't from the area. He'd been traveling across the state, just passing through when his bike began acting up. He hadn't expected to stay long, but when he saw the mechanic's shop, he thought he'd found a safe place to stop. He was a seasoned rider, used to the road, and used to people who didn't always understand him. But he never thought that something as simple as seeking help for a broken-down bike would lead to such a bitter experience. After Ray's refusal to help him, Marcus had left the shop with a feeling of disbelief. He couldn't shake the weight of those words, the venom that had dripped from Ray's mouth. As he sat on his bike outside, staring at the shop, Marcus wrestled with the urge to do something. To turn around and confront Ray right there, but he knew better. Instead, he decided to tell his story. It wasn't just about his bike anymore. It was about making sure Ray understood that this behavior wouldn't be tolerated. Marcus posted a video of the incident online. He wasn't looking for sympathy, but he knew that sharing the experience would bring attention to the mechanic's actions. What he didn't expect, however, was the overwhelming response. Within hours, the video had been shared thousands of times. Messages flooded in from people all over, people who had been through similar experiences, people who had once been silent, and people who now saw Marcus as a symbol of courage. The aftermath of Marcus's video spread quickly through social media and beyond. It didn't take long for the town to take notice. Some locals, including the few who had defended Ray for years, began to question their loyalty. How could they support someone who would treat a person so disrespectfully? Ray's past comments, the ones he had once brushed off, now seemed far more sinister. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about the larger issue of racial prejudice. And Ray's actions were now a catalyst for something much bigger. Ray tried to brush it off at first. He denied ever saying those things, claiming that Marcus had misunderstood him. But the video was clear, and it didn't take long for the evidence to pile up. Other customers began to share their own stories of feeling mistreated, of subtle slights and microaggressions they had experienced from Ray over the years. The mechanic, who had once been a trusted name in the town, was now being forced to face the consequences of his long-hidden biases. The community, divided, began to react. A group of loyal customers banded together to defend Ray, claiming that the video was an exaggeration, that Marcus had provoked him, or that he simply misunderstood Ray's words. They didn't want to believe that the man they had trusted for so long could harbor such hateful views. Meanwhile, others called for action, demanding that Ray be held accountable for his behavior. The once quiet, peaceful town was now divided, and the tension was palpable. The local news outlets caught wind of the story, and soon reporters were flooding the town. Ray was forced into the spotlight, facing questions he wasn't prepared for. People showed up outside his shop, some protesting, some offering support. But one thing was clear: Ray could no longer hide behind his reputation. His business was faltering, customers were leaving, and the pressure was mounting. In the midst of all this, Marcus found himself caught in a whirlwind. At first, he had just wanted to stand up for himself, but now, his actions had sparked something much bigger. He had become a symbol of resistance, a man who refused to back down in the face of hate. But as the days went on, he began to feel the weight of the situation. His video had gone viral, but it also meant that his every move was being scrutinized. People who supported him were sending him messages of gratitude, but others, who saw Ray as a victim, were calling him troublemaker, someone who had caused unnecessary drama. The town's conflict was becoming more intense. On one side, there were those who saw Ray's behavior as a symptom of a much larger societal issue that needed to be addressed. On the other, there were those who believed that Ray was being unfairly targeted, that his past contributions to the town somehow outweighed his actions now. And Marcus, caught in the middle, was struggling to keep the moral high ground. He didn't want to make this about revenge, but every day felt like a new battle, and he wasn't sure if he could continue facing the fallout. The story was far from over. Ray, who had once felt untouchable, now faced the consequences of his actions in a way that was impossible to ignore. The tension in the town grew thicker with each passing day, and Marcus could only wonder how long it would take before things would finally come to a head. Would Ray come to understand the damage he had caused? Or would the town continue to split under the weight of the conflict? As Marcus rode through the streets, the answer felt like it was just out of reach, a question that hung in the air, unresolved, as the storm continued to gather. As the days wore on, the town found itself on the brink of an undeniable crisis. Ray's shop, once a well-loved landmark, was now a battleground. The social media storm only intensified, drawing in not just locals, but people from outside the town, demanding accountability. But for all the online outrage, the tension in the town was becoming a powder keg, ready to explode. Ray had tried to keep his head down, hoping the chaos would eventually blow over. He'd even closed his shop for a few days, hoping the heat would die down. But the weight of the situation was too heavy to ignore. Marcus, too, was feeling the pressure. His initial sense of justice and duty had shifted to something else entirely. He wasn't sure if he was fighting for his own dignity anymore, or for something larger, something that could change the very way people saw each other in this town. Yet with each passing day, the personal toll of standing up against Ray became harder to bear. He had been approached by the local media for interviews, and his own community, the one he had once felt so connected to, seemed split down the middle. Some saw him as a hero, while others saw him as the man who had torn apart their town's unity. No matter how much support he received online, the personal toll was starting to wear him down. But Marcus wasn't about to back down. He knew that if this didn't get resolved now, nothing would change in the future. And so, with the whole town watching, he made the decision to confront Ray one final time. This time, it wouldn't be in the garage. Marcus drove his bike to the heart of town, parked in front of Ray's shop, and waited for him to come outside. Ray, having seen Marcus arrive, stepped out of his shop, his face tense, his shoulders stiff. The animosity was clear, but this time there was something different about Ray. He wasn't the same mechanic who had dismissed Marcus all those days ago. The pressure, the fear of losing everything, seemed to have broken through his defenses. "I don't know what you want from me," Ray said, his voice lower than it had ever been before. Marcus, standing tall, took a deep breath. "I just want you to understand. I want you to see that what you said, what you did, it wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who has had to put up with your prejudice. It's not something you can brush off anymore. The whole town is looking at you now." There was a long pause. For a moment, Ray said nothing. He just stood there, looking at the man who had come to represent everything he had ignored for so long. Ray's face twisted with confusion, perhaps guilt, but most of all, fear. "I didn't think anyone would call me out," Ray muttered, almost to himself. "I thought I could get away with it. No one cared before." "Maybe that's the problem," Marcus replied. Maybe no one cared, but now they do. Ray looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling. The weight of his actions was finally hitting him. It was in that moment, the raw realization that his whole life, his business, his reputation, his community, was now unraveling before him, that he finally understood the damage he had caused. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus waited, allowing Ray the space to reflect, to come to terms with the consequences of his behavior. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ray looked up, his face filled with something he hadn't shown before: remorse. I'm sorry, he said, the words coming out almost as a whisper. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm sorry. For Marcus, it wasn't about hearing those words. It wasn't even about the apology. It was about the change, the growth, the understanding. Ray wasn't the same man who had turned him away. He was different now, and that meant something. The town would never be the same again either. Ray's shop, once a symbol of pride, would be closing its doors for good. The customers who had remained loyal to him for so long had begun to leave, their faith shattered. It wasn't just about the business, it was about something more, about how one person's actions could ripple through an entire community. The small divided town was starting to rebuild, slowly, and the road ahead wasn't easy. But Marcus had started a conversation that couldn't be ignored, and that in itself was a victory. The closing of Ray's shop wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something bigger. For Marcus, it was about showing that standing up for what's right doesn't always lead to easy victories, but it does lead to change. And for the town, it was about realizing that progress often starts with one person speaking out, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard. As Marcus revved his bike and rode out of the town, the weight of the past few weeks lifted from his shoulders. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the road ahead. He had done what he set out to do, and as the wind blew through his hair, he couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of hope. Change was hard, but it was possible. And sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to make a difference. The journey wasn't over, but Marcus knew this. The fight for respect, dignity, and equality was far from finished. But as he rode on, he knew that he had already begun to change the course of history, one small step at a time. And that was a victory worth celebrating.